Good evening, sir.
Yo, this is episode 71 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast with your hosts, Brett and CH. Today's topics. Looks like the Bitcoin network finally had its 500 millionth transaction. Big milestone just happened this past week, first week in February. We'll touch on that. The next thing looks like spending fiat and receiving Bitcoin is the next trend with the Lightning Network. Jack Mallers put out a new application. We'll talk about that and see what kind of implications that has on demand for Bitcoin and spending. And then last but not least, there's a great thread from Brendan Bernstein on this global macro topic that you and I have been discussing, and Raoul Pal's kind of been banging this drum for a while now, just the boomer retirement macro event and what that means when it feels like you're on the cusp of a deflationary crisis. And Brendan does a good job of kind of weaving Bitcoin into that, and what does that mean when you think about that kind of macro event and scarce assets. So we'll go through that. But how you doing this week, man? You survived the weekend.
I survived the weekend. I am hopefully not infected yet. That's all I know.
I'm not sure if I am either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just telling you, one of my coworkers was on a plane with someone that was infected.
So does he quarantine himself? Like, what's the deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, they actually work from home full time, so I can imagine them not leaving their home for a couple weeks.
That's so scary, and the problem is now, and I don't mean to kind of move away from the topics we'll talk about, but like now I saw a report that people have been up to 24 days, the incubation period, which it's impossible to stop at this point. It's a pandemic. People don't want to accept it yet. Equity markets haven't accepted it because commodities have been destroyed. Oil and copper have been destroyed, and I'm sure other things have been hit pretty hard too. But the equity markets are just like, eh. But again, it's just because every central bank is easing and throwing money at the problem, which is just going to make the inevitable bust here very depressing. And then also, I wanted to punch one more thing, is the 9-day, the coronavirus being able to stay in objects for 9 days at room temperature is a little scary. Anything coming from China, it's like, because they ship things so quickly, it can be here in 3 days. So
right, wipe your shit down.
Wipe your shit down.
All right, let's jump into this 500 millionth Bitcoin transaction. So that happened first week of February. The network has processed its 500 millionth transaction. So, that's kind of a big milestone when you think about how many transactions PayPal has processed over the years. And then you have Visa and MasterCard and American Express, who've been in this space for a long time, and they perform so many transactions. And this is, just an interesting milestone, and it took 11 years to get there. But I think that it shows there's demand for Bitcoin, right? Why would there not be 500 million transactions so far? I mean, it's actually pretty impressive for something that was just magic internet money a couple years ago, and nobody really gave a shit. But I thought an interesting thing to mention was that in 2017, the number of transactions was only around 250 million for the whole network up until that point. So from January 2009 up until 2017. So basically what that means is the last 3 years drove half of the total amount of transactions that the Bitcoin network has ever processed. So it looks like the demand has been very recent. So I don't know. What do you think? You think that demand is just going to pick up and increase as it looks like we're heading into this more of a bull market phase? And, do you think we're going to see 500 million more transactions in half that amount of time, maybe 1.5, 2 years?
All I know is I was going to say that's, considering that, the whole euphoria ended basically at, probably I'd say by May of 2018 was when it really started to die. It's pretty crazy that we've crossed 500 million. We went from 250 to 500 in 2 years. So that shows people are using it for whatever they're using it for. So if it's 2020 now, February 2020, I bet you by February 2022, we'll be at a billion. I'm not going to say 1,000 million because it's a billion, and a billion sounds cooler.
Yeah, sounds way cooler. No, I think that's a good guess, right? I mean, if that's the way the curve's kind of steepening there, I can see another 500 million transactions. But the real question is, when we're talking about all these additional transactions and the transactions growing and demand growing, what happens with fees, right? Now, you and I remember, I don't know about you, but I was withdrawing coins in December 2017 or November 2017 and paying 20, 30, sometimes $40 a pop to withdraw off of the exchange. Because at that point, I think I was just buying as much as I could, or a couple $100 worth, and then withdrawing and then doing it again because I was so petrified to leave Bitcoin on the exchange. But it got expensive. So now this time around, demand's picking up. What happens with fees?
Yeah, no, the transaction fees was November, December, January 2018 were insane on Bitcoin. And I think I mentioned this before in podcasts, and we've definitely touched on it. That was why that whole altcoin narrative was so prevalent, was you couldn't use Bitcoin. Like, it was, you would, if you were sending off an exchange that didn't allow you to have a high transaction fee, or it didn't, either A, you could pick the transaction fee, or B, it picked it for you. And if it picked it for you and it wasn't a high transaction fee, you could send it and you might not receive that Bitcoin at the other address for a whole day. It was,
right.
They get, what is it? This sounds, might be wrong, but it gets stuck in the mempool, right?
Yeah, so it depends. If you could send a transaction out with, say, 1, 2, 3 Satoshis per byte, which would be on the lower side. That would be pretty cheap. It should only cost a few pennies. If there's a lot of transactions going into the mempool, people are sending Bitcoin around to different exchanges, moving them off the exchanges. Sometimes the Satoshis per byte can really go up, where you're starting to pay a couple bucks, and then, like we saw in 2017, $10, $20, $30, $40. It can really pick up quickly. But yeah, it just gets lost in the mempool. If you're a miner and you want to withdraw and you're willing to pay 1 Satoshi per byte, but the someone else is willing to pay 40 Satoshis per byte to get in the next block, well, I'm just going to leave your transaction in the mempool because you're not making the fees. And that's where things like replace by fee technology is interesting, because you can send a transaction at 1 Satoshi per byte, and then you can check 6 hours later and you're like no one's picking up this transaction. You can pump up the fees and say, all right, I'm willing to pay more, until it kind of gets put into the next block. So there's ways around that, but on one hand, it's necessary. I think we're going to run into these fee market issues again, because I don't think Coinbase did a good job of figuring out how they're going to batch transactions and moving to different signature schemes that require less data that needs to go to the blockchain. I mean, same with Binance. I think they were supposed to implement SegWit soon, and I don't know that they did. And then you have your more progressive exchanges like Bitfinex that offer Lightning withdrawals and deposits, which is just totally different than all the other exchanges. So with Lightning, you're paying, a fraction of a Satoshi to send a payment through to the exchange. And I think what you're going to see, not this bull market, but the following bear market, what you're going to see is all the exchanges that have volume that moves away from them and to other exchanges that have a better infrastructure. They're going to need to then implement the latest and greatest technologies, whether that be, sidechain stuff with Liquid Network or Lightning Network, or, just regular old signature, like using SegWit, just getting with the fucking program and batching transactions. It's not super complicated stuff, but they won't do it. So I think it's going to get pushed in that direction, and they're going to lose profits because of it.
Yeah. I mean, Coinbase is honestly, like, I hate Coinbase. I mean, granted, Coinbase Pro is different. What used to be GDAX, which was a little bit nicer, because Coinbase fees are insane. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I remember, like, when I first got into crypto, and, like, you'd buy something on Coinbase and you just realized how much you were just getting eaten away. And
right.
I don't know. You know better with the Cash App. What's the Cash App fee?
I want to say it's like 1.76% to purchase, and then their withdrawal features, I don't think the fees are very high. They typically put it on a fairly low fee rate, so you're not getting gouged. Like I remember with Binance, it was like 0.0005 BTC or something. Mm-hmm. It was like a significant amount where when you look back, you'll be pissed that you spent so much Bitcoin withdrawing like just in fees to them.
Yeah,
and people don't know any different, so like they just do it, and you don't realize you're getting hosed for this huge transaction fee. But it's fine because other exchanges are going to implement the newest technologies, and people will go where it's the cheapest and the best, period. So I have a feeling there's another company, we haven't mentioned them yet, but I wanted to, as River Financial, and it's just an exchange, not really for selling so much, although you can. It's more for just buying and holding, and they have like a nice user interface, and it's like it's basically for dollar cost averaging. I mean, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see what the dashboard looks like. That's pretty slick, right?
Yeah, no,
it has your balance over time that you accumulate. You can get discounts for setting recurring buys. So if you want to buy $100 a week or something on a Friday morning, you can set that, and it gives you a discount to spot purchases, which is kind of nice if that's like your thing and you want to save for your future. That's the way you want to do it. River seems like a great option as opposed to Coinbase. But the interesting thing about River is they have all of the latest technology, from Lightning Network and being able to do Lightning withdrawals and deposits. So they're Bitcoin only, right? That's their only product, so they can be hyper focused on it and offer the latest and greatest solutions. So I think these newer, smaller players will outcompete from the tech standpoint, and then if they get pumped enough, maybe you see some of that volume leave Binance, leave Coinbase, leave Gemini, and start moving over to these players who are trying to take Bitcoin, I think, a little bit more seriously, and give their customers an edge, so they can either hodl better or have better dashboards, analytics. Who knows?
Their Jonathan Wilkins, their chief security officer, really does look like a security officer.
Yeah, he doesn't fuck around, this guy.
Sorry, I had to make that.
I've never met him. The Alex Leishman, the CEO's in San Francisco. I'm going to try to meet up with him at Bitcoin 2020 and kind of see what he has to say. But dude, when you listen to him on other podcasts, he's fucking good, dude. Like very Bitcoin libertarian type. It's March. Oh, speaking of that, this is a good time. If you are interested in attending Bitcoin 2020, I believe I have a promo code that's still up. It's Humor20. You get 20% off your ticket.
You got 2 days and 20 hours and 5 minutes and 10 seconds before the tickets go up. Before
the price increases, yeah. I had a great time last year. I'm really looking forward to this year again. It's going to be...
all I gotta say is things can change in the next 6 weeks, my friend.
Yeah, it'll be interesting either if everybody's wearing like gloves and
hazmat,
N95 mask and sunglasses. Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
I still need to buy my N95 mask. I was supposed to go to Ace Hardware today because I was going to buy more propane tanks because I like having a lot stocked now, because at least if shit does really hit the fan, I can still cook some meat. But, yeah, I need to buy those N95. I have a shit ton of surgical masks, though. Not that it really matters, It seems like, but whatever. It's for the comfort of mind. Dude, it really throws a fucking curveball at what this year can become, because if this really does, and I know it's off topic again, but if it really does get, they're labeling, like the WHO has labeled this as a pandemic, so if it really does become that, how, the United States is supposed to have a presidential election this year, along with, the congressional and everything else, that's going to get completely whatever, curveball if this continues. I mean, you can't hold presidential rallies, when people are sick. That's like a perfect place to spread it too. I mean, it is. And I was thinking, like, you got in the U.S., and then again, this is off topic, but you have like March Madness coming up very shortly. Is that gonna, be a perfect example of how this could spread? I mean, one British citizen was labeled a super spreader and gave it to like 11 people. It's like, what happens if a person who's sick shows up at one of those, arenas? How many people get sick?
No, yeah, I agree with you.
It's gonna really get interesting here.
Yeah, let's go into this next topic: spending fiat, receiving Bitcoin. I saw this announcement by Jack Mallers, the founder of Zap Wallet. It's a great Lightning and Bitcoin wallet that you can use. Highly recommend it. in his trials and tribulations trying to bootstrap Zap Wallet and get more adoption and users on Lightning, he realized that one, not everybody wants to spend their Bitcoin because number go up. You don't want to spend something that's constantly appreciating.
Number go
right?
up.
Yeah, I mean, so that's an obvious one. But you have a lot of hobbyists and other people who just want to test it out, want to be able to spend it. So there's that. And then the second thing that he mentioned, which is everyone's least favorite topic, is that technically Bitcoin's treated as property. So every time you're spending Bitcoin on something, it's a taxable event, right? So if you want to buy a book for $10 and the Bitcoin accounting where the Bitcoin you're using and from a first in, first out standpoint, you bought below what the current price is today, well, technically you made money on that $10 book that you're buying. So that's subject to capital gains. Super frustrating. Coin Center's working on de minimis tax laws where, say you spend under a couple $100 or something, and you don't have to worry about it. So more to come on that. Hopefully that comes sooner rather than later. But it's like a surprisingly big issue. There are people out there who are afraid of the long dick of the law, even if it's for a $10 book or a 15-cent, Lightning invoice for whatever. It's an issue. So he's like, all right, well, how can you spend fiat, spend US dollars and pay someone in Bitcoin or in Lightning? And I mean, it's pretty slick. And the one of the main use cases for that right now, and he shows it in this video. So for anybody watching on YouTube, you'll be able to watch it on the video, and anybody listening in the car or wherever, you'll be able to hear it. But pretty much you can now pay for Lightning invoices, whether that be something like Fold, where Fold app, you can buy gift cards through an app and you earn Bitcoin back. But if you pay with Bitcoin, you get double the amount of Bitcoin back. So you get 4% back on Amazon gift cards. It's a pretty sweet deal. So now you can link an app to your debit card, send, and then pay Lightning invoices. Boom. You never touch the Bitcoin, no more capital gains issues, and you can double your sats back in this particular use case. So I'll go ahead and let you play this video.
I've got Strike downloaded and installed on my phone. I've got my bank account connected to it as a payment method. I have no LND. I have no node. I have no channels. I have no Bitcoin. I have no capacity. I have no anything. All I have is Strike and my Chase bank account connected to it. I'm gonna go to Fold. I'm gonna buy this gift card over Lightning and get some sats back. I'm going to pay this Lightning invoice with US dollars. So here's the invoice. Going to scan it, confirm my payment. Just taking my US dollars and sending the payment over the Lightning network. Boom, done. Claim my sats back, and I've just used my Chase bank account to pay a Lightning invoice. You don't need a node. You don't need channels. You don't need Bitcoin. To interact with the Bitcoin and Lightning protocols, all you need is a debit card or a bank account. How easy is that? Shout out the haters. Shout out Jamie Dimon, Chase. We couldn't do it without you.
I think I'm going to have to start doing that.
It's pretty sweet, right?
Yeah. I had to watch it a second time and kind of... But, yeah.
Right, you get to think through it a little bit. And
yeah.
See how, I mean, I've been using, disclaimer, Fold is definitely not a sponsor of this podcast. I wish they were. That would be fucking sick. But I really do enjoy the product. And I've stacked, enough Satoshis that it's been worth my while so far. Just buying random, the normal everyday stuff that I have to buy anyway. I go to Target fairly often to get some stuff. I get anything else on Amazon. They have a lot of other different gift card options available, like REI, Target, Airbnb, Uber. I mean, it ends up working out in your favor. The problem is you just have to buy these gift cards that are, in certain denominations, which that's the catch, I guess. It doesn't always work out if you need to buy something for a couple bucks. But what an awesome way to earn Bitcoin back. And when I watched this video, I was like, all right, this is sick, because now you can take advantage of all of being able to spend Bitcoin. And when you spend Bitcoin, there's other types of rewards that you can get, because it's saving the merchant on the credit card fees that they typically have to encounter, right? So that could be 2, 3, sometimes even more than that for like the high-end Amex cards where you pay like $1,000 a year to have access to the card and you get all these extra points. Well, the merchant covers those fees, but when the merchant doesn't mind and they can receive Bitcoin and the fees decrease, it's sick. And even with this, like I can if I want to charge someone for a promo on the Crypto Humor Instagram page, I can send them a Lightning invoice and get paid in Bitcoin because that's the preferred currency I want to get paid in. And they can spend USD. You see where that gets pretty interesting?
Yeah.
You know, I don't foresee anybody actually wanting to spend Bitcoin anytime soon just because it's appreciating. Like we talked about, it's volatile. But if you can use it as like a payment rail and the user is spending US dollars, I like that. And I like it because it drives demand for Bitcoin. So now if you have, let's say, a couple 100,000 users who are, you know, buying a couple bucks worth every week of just gift cards that they would use normally, but you have Bitcoin purchases on the other side of that, that's increasing demand, right? So you need more little shit like that where Bitcoin becomes the technology that's being used and there's like buy pressure on that other side. That's where I think it gets more interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, as you're saying, nobody wants to spend their money of appreciating asset. That's just, it's like, it'd be like, you know, anyone would be like the people who bought like the 10,000 Bitcoin pizza, or someone I saw comment yesterday like, oh, I bought like X amount of weed. They bought like, I don't know,
like $1 million worth of weed.
Yeah, it was like they like, it's like, dude, that's just unfortunate. It's the same thing. It's like the people who, you know, say you bought some with Bitcoin at the, you know, end of 2018 or early 2019, and you spent it at, you know, one Bitcoin equals $3,300 or $3,400, and now Bitcoin's at 10,300. It's like you just missed out on, you know, over a 200% gain.
Right.
Which in the words of Crypto Humor, that is nothing to sneeze at.
Right, yeah, it's nothing to sneeze at for sure. Hold on to those stats as long as you can. But it's sick. I hope more stuff like this starts coming out because I definitely would prefer spending my fiat and getting Bitcoin back in these kind of circumstances.
It's like cash back. Except...
Yeah, basically. Yeah, I think the cash back where a Bitcoin is the reward, it will be big. It's just going to take some time. Nobody cares except for me and, you know, probably a couple thousand other people who know about it who are like, yeah, I'm going to take advantage of this.
Yeah.
Nobody else really cares. But it's a good onboarding mechanism for noobs, right?
Yeah.
If you tell somebody, oh, you can get Bitcoin back whenever you buy a gift card, like if you buy Starbucks gift cards, you can use this app and earn 4% Bitcoin back if you want to. That's a pretty good fucking deal. Some people spend $100 a week at Starbucks buying, you know, lattes and shit. People like earning stuff, and all of a sudden now you have a reward that can rapidly appreciate in value. Like significantly appreciate in value, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, I paid for coffee for an entire year because I drank so much of it and earned so much Bitcoin back. It just gets interesting.
I was gonna say, if you're making big purchases, I don't know if you'd be able to do this with purchases like over $1,000 or what, but like it really makes sense then. Like
dude, like with the other Bitcoin back Lolly, you can use you can buy shit on Apple. So like I might be in the market for an iPad if I'm gonna drop $1,000 and I can get a decent amount back in Bitcoin, I'm gonna fucking do that for sure. All of a sudden that reward might pay off the iPad in like 10 years. You want to jump into
we definitely can jump into the end of the world, the end of the baby boomers. Is that what you want to?
Yeah. So Brendan Bernstein put out a pretty sweet thread where he was basically saying most people think BTC is going to pump from a Zimbabwe-esque hyperinflation, but the opposite is going to happen. We're on the precipice of a deflationary crisis, and this is why BTC will pump. So he's taking the other side of that bet. He's saying, well, you know, I'm thinking we might be heading towards a deflationary recession, and Bitcoin will also pump at that time as well. And he gets into a little bit of the reason why towards the end of the thread, but pretty much because he's trying to look at scarce assets, right? And Bitcoin is one of the ones on his list in particular because he knows a decent amount about Bitcoin, but not everybody does. So what do you think? You want to work our way down a little bit here?
Do we? Well, we could.
I think that one.
There's a lot of really good. I'm just scrolling down to see how many it is. There's a lot. I could either. I almost kind of want to read it. Do you want me to just read it and then we go back through them? Because I feel like there's a lot of solid points, and it's really not. It's maybe a few paragraphs, really.
Yeah. Go for it.
So I'll start with it. And I think you already read this, but I'll just start from the top. And for those wondering, Brendan Bernstein his Twitter handle is at @BMBernstein. Most people think BTC is going to pump from a Zimbabwe-esque hyperinflation, but the opposite is going to happen. We're on the precipice of a deflationary crisis, and this is why BTC will pump. Here's why. Debt has peaked and is beginning to turn. As people deleverage, this suppresses inflation because income goes to debt servicing instead of goods and services. This is why the Fed can pump $4 trillion into the economy and CPI doesn't budge. CPI is Consumer Price Index. Growth is also a product of demographics. Boomers are the largest demographic, and the retirement is peaking in the next 5 years. Over the last 100 years, labor force grew by 5x. Over the next 100, it will only grow 20%. There will be less and less money to spend. Additionally, GDP growth is directly tied to population growth. Population growth in the 1960s at 2.1% and will hit 0% in the next 100 years. The massive tailwind is shifting to a headwind. Population growth increases demand for goods, inflation, and the stock market. The success of our consumerist capitalist society may just be a product of labor and exponential population growth. This is also why a $1 trillion tax cut and $300 million in fiscal spending led to almost no growth. Boomers, which were a massive spending and stock market growth tailwind, are going to turn into a headwind this year. The RMD law requires that they take cash out of the stock market. As a result, up to $10 trillion in assets will be subject to mandatory withdrawals. Do you know what RMD stands for?
I don't.
I'm going to look it up really quickly because I meant to look that up earlier. Okay, required minimum distribution. And it looks like
right, so the minimum amount that you need to sell, basically. Yeah. Required minimum distribution. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you can't just leave it in, right? You have to take it out. And
forced selling, and it's just selling. And I'll get back into this in a second, but like boomers who are downsizing from houses or and moving into condos or whatnot because they're getting old and they don't need a giant house. There's no one there to buy those bags. I'm going to jump right back into this. The problem is that we are at the peak of debt, and stability of our society rest on an increasing stock market and increasing growth to service that debt. Stock market declines are a national security concern, and the Fed will be forced to plug this hole. This is a great chart from Raoul GMI, which is Raoul Pal, shows the U.S. labor force participation rate overlaid with the Fed balance sheet. As more people leave the workforce, the Fed has been plugging the gap by expanding their balance sheet. And this chart's really phenomenal. If you're on YouTube, I'm just popping it up. It is basically the U.S. labor participation rate with the left-hand scale in percentage, and then the Fed balance sheet is inverted on the right-hand scale, and it's like what, 95% correlated, 99. I mean, it's
pretty correlated.
It's very, very correlated. It's a scary thought of what will happen as that continues to downtrend. Continuing on with Bernstein's tweet thread here. This trend is only accelerating, and based on the upcoming boomer retirements, this correlation would predict a doubling of the Fed balance sheet over the near term. Many people assume Bitcoin is going to stave off a Zimbabwe-esque hyperinflation of the USD. But because of the demographic and population growth and debt dynamics, it's more likely the opposite occurs. Extremely low growth and Japanification of the world, long adult diapers. Japanification basically means like Japan's been stuck and they have not been able to do anything for deflation basically since the 1990 stock market peak of their Nikkei 225, and they have not hit that high for 30 years. And no matter how much money they print, no matter how much the Bank of Japan, how many assets they buy, if the Bank of Japan owns over half of the Nikkei 225's, is it top 50%, stocks, It's incredible, and I can't think of the exact number off the top of my head, but they own a lot. They literally buy stocks, and they still can't raise the price. But anyways, continuing on, negative rates will be a norm in this world, but because our system is predicated on growth, the Fed is going to be forced to extreme measures to counter it. It's not a question of if we get MMT, but when. MMT is modern monetary theory. The best predictor of gold prices and Bitcoin prices, too, ultimately, is not the dollar inflation, it's real yields. The Fed's hands are tied. Over the next 50 years, yields will be absolutely crushed. And there could be nothing better for scarce assets like Bitcoin and gold as the Fed is forced to ramp up printing to attempt to counteract these trends. There's a black hole in the pension system, and inequality is ramping up. Geopolitical instability is festering. The Fed is going to be forced to prop it all up and anesthetize everything to death. Sir, I can't even say that last word.
Sayonara.
Sayonara to any fiat purchasing power. Long scarce assets. Thank you. That is it.
I got you, fam.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing thread. A lot to touch on. The demographic change is interesting, and it's something that Raoul Paul talks about a lot, and I don't think I personally take it very seriously just because I don't understand a lot of the nuance that Raoul does on this particular topic, but he does have a good point because he frames it in such a way where, and I can talk about California specifically, there are a lot of homes that boomers own that are now worth over $1 million. They 2, 3, 4, 5x their money, sometimes even more than that, depending upon where they bought in California. Their homes are worth a ton. It's a nest egg that they plan on retiring for. The problem is they need to sell that asset at the exact top. Now, in certain places like the Bay Area, or maybe places in LA or really close to the beach, stuff like that, there's always going to be demand for these super high-end luxury places, but only when people are making absurd amounts of money. So you have developers working at Google or Apple or somewhere else over here making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year who can casually buy these really expensive homes, and they don't give a shit. The problem is, as Raoul points out, you have mass retirements for boomers over the next 5-10 years, and that they're just going to be leaving the workforce in mass, essentially, and they're one of the largest generations, I guess, or are they the largest? I'm not 100% sure, but it's a lot of fucking people that are going to retire, and pretty much who are they going to dump those bags off to? Because all the millennials are broke and the Gen Xers have already bought their shit, and Gen Z is just getting to the point where they're going to start working and graduating from high school and all that other stuff, and they don't necessarily want to go to college and do some of this other stuff that the millennials ended up having to do. So everyone's in this tough spot with no money, a ton of debt, and boomers need to dump their bags to someone else, and the people who they're going to dump on don't have any money. So what happens then?
The whole situation's kind of screwed, and again, it's a demographics thing. And I read a tweet not too long ago, and it nailed it. Everyone's afraid of overpopulation of the earth, but the real thing is depopulation that's we're facing, and it's because, especially throughout the West, the birth rates are extremely low. Whether you look at Western Europe or America, with extremely low birth rates, there's no one there to buy bags. It's just that simple. And to go back to, this is what I meant to say earlier about the Bank of Japan. It was a top, and this is from April 2019. A top 10 shareholder in 50% of the Nikkei 225, and also on top of that, the Bank of Japan owns a stunning 75% of all Japanese ETFs. I mean, that is the world Japan has been in for almost 20 years. The Bank of Japan began quantitative easing in 2001 before anyone else, because they basically had a whole decade where their markets didn't go up, they went sideways and down, and that is most likely where we are heading. And I that's like when I look at charts like Apple and Microsoft, I am very scared. Sure, they keep going up, but at some point that parabolic advance does not continue. And as we were saying, like that the required minimum distribution, the RMD, people have to sell their bags. It's just going to happen. And when it happens, it's going to be painful, and there's no one there to buy them, at least at this price.
Right. No, that's the thing. Who's going to buy it and at what price? For me, I need a 50, 60, 75% reduction in the price of real estate to even consider buying it. And I think the interesting thing to touch on here, especially when I think about things like Bitcoin and real estate and other assets where you would put your money, the reason why real estate has increased in value so much is because the money has been shit in the meantime. So you're looking for other places to store your wealth. Everybody looked like a genius who bought homes in the 90s because they went up, because their currency was being debased. Had the money held its value over time, maybe you wouldn't spend so much in a home, or it wouldn't have been pushed up in that direction. So I think the lack of a solid money allows for more of a distortion in the marketplace than you'd see, and I think you see that in stonks, things like real estate, high-end real estate, just really whack. Even like sports cards now. I saw this Gary Vee video that I watched the other day. He was talking about, like basketball cards and slinging them for like thousands of dollars a piece, like LeBron James rookie cards, stuff like that. And he bought them for $1,000 like a year or two ago. And I was looking at that. I'm like, that's a scarce good. That's storing value. People are, you have millennials and other people who are storing their value in weird shit because money just isn't that good anymore. It's going to be worthless, and you without even thinking about it, you store it in other places because it's a better use of the money. The money's not that great.
Yeah, it's clear in our day and age that fiat currency is completely worthless, and everyone knows it, but they don't know it. Like, I always try to show normies, like, I'm like, you do realize that your dollar has lost 98% of its value since, or it's probably more than that, really, since, 1913, the creation of the Federal Reserve. And I try to explain to people, it's like, we don't have sound money, and it's hard for people to grasp if they aren't into it and they haven't jumped down that rabbit hole like you and I have. And it's like, people think, we can just continue on at this rate, but at some point things matter and things change, and that's, people aren't ready for change. And I think, at least I have come to accept that the world I grew up in is not going to be the same by 2030. I just know that. And it already is different, obviously, but I know, like, 2020 has been a freaking ridiculous year. I don't care what anyone says. Between the Iran missile strikes, between what's going on with the repo, which has been going on since September, and then on top of this, the coronavirus, which I think is our black swan, and it's labeled a pandemic now, and I don't know where this takes us, but, we could see the global economy just come to a grinding halt here in the next 6 months, which would destroy asset prices. And does that mean rates just go up exponentially? Do bond prices go up? Or not bond prices. Do, the yield on bonds finally go up? And are we not stuck in this ridiculous world where people are getting paid to take loans? Like, I'm not opposed to negative rates if I can take out, $100 million loan and just live off the negative yield. It's like, but it's not for you. It's only for special people and, banks and whatnot. We're all stuck paying ridiculous rates on credit cards. It's been the insanity of this past decade where, banks are paying 25 basis points for lending overnight, and yet student loans are at ridiculous rates. Auto loans are at pretty high rates. And obviously credit cards are like 19 to 20%. It's highway robbery. And it's sad because most people don't even know what's going on. And, like, Rudy, you haven't seen, if you aren't following him, follow him on Twitter. He nails it all the time. Like, there's all these bankers who caused the 2008 financial crisis and nearly collapsed everything we know as the financial world, and none of them got in trouble. And one banker got arrested, and Bernie Madoff was the one who took all the fall. And
right, Bernie was the fucking fall guy.
Yeah, he was there like, this Bernie guy, dude, look at him, he ran a Ponzi scheme. But not us who, were just dicking around with mortgage-backed securities and whatnot and repackaging everything and labeling them as, AAA, AA, and then in reality they were just packaged with fucking, like, Triple C and other bullshit and, junk bonds. It's insanity. And it's unfortunate because it's going to happen again. There's no way around it except this time, as Jesse Colombo says. And I think Jesse Colombo nails it, and this is why I'm kind of pessimistic on the next decade. He's like, we're not going to just like, the stock market isn't just going to go down. There's going to be war, there's going to be crisis, there's going to be famine because of the past decade, because of the policies. And I agree with him. Like, things are going to have to revert, and it's going to be painful. And like, shit, I saw a video, and I don't know if I sent it to you, of a young Asian girl, Chinese, excuse me, literally killed 2 people inside of a store for like antiseptic.
That's crazy.
I know. And I was talking with my grandpa earlier about this. I'm like, we forget people are humans, and I think this, what's going on with this coronavirus might bring the worst out in people, especially when you talk about like supplies running out. Like, Singapore ran out of supplies in a day. There were lines of people, and everything was stripped of the shelves. And if you don't think it can happen in the U.S., I would highly suggest just look at, like, most grocery stores stock like 3-4 days of supplies, and the whole of the U.S. and Zero Hedge ran an article about this a few months ago. We rely so heavily on the trucking industry, and all these people who are green activists, we have to end trucking with it. No, if we didn't have the trucking industry, your fucking, Frappuccino at Starbucks wouldn't happen. You getting your freaking, vegan salad wouldn't happen. So anyone who says the trucking industry needs to go should actually learn that it's literally the lifeline of the U.S. And without that, everything halts, and we have no supplies at your grocery stores, no supplies at your restaurant, you name it.
I think you mentioned a good point just about how complex a economy can be, and why free market capitalism is so important. You need that price signal to send signals to the market to go build products that are being demanded, right? You don't think about the entire trucking industry and the logistics of growing the lettuce or the cows and the milk or whatever, and then transporting that all across the country. And, California does a lot of the growing and production for all the food supplies across the entire country. In Texas and then across the Midwest, you have all these other producers, but the goods have to come in from somewhere. Like, it doesn't just magically happen, and it can break down really quickly, and that's really scary when you really take a step back and think about it. Where even these weird black swan type events like the coronavirus, it's like, I could say, it's happening in China, what the fuck do I care? But 6 months from now, you can't see that hindsight of, I didn't realize that was going to delay production of the new iPads, and that was going to have an impact on Apple's earnings, but I wouldn't find out about that impact on Apple's earnings in Q1, Q2 until the middle of the summer. And you know what I mean? Like, all of a sudden this ripple effect starts to happen, and you can realize that you weren't prepared for something like that. It can just get messier than you think. And if you take Japan and look at them as an example, I don't think printing as much money as possible ended up being such a great thing, right? Because it ended up misallocating resources anyway. The stocks are still in the fucking tubes. It didn't work, right? It wasn't that helpful. The good thing about Japan is that they're good savers anyway. They're very risk averse. So they're not going to run into the same issue that we'd run into here in America, where the people who voted for all these benefits programs for the kids who weren't born yet to end up paying for it they didn't take that seriously, where they just thought, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to get Social Security, and somebody else is going to pay for that for me, so I didn't have to save. So you had the opposite of what Japan has. So even though the Japanification happened in Japan, right, and stocks never recovered, they were good savers, and that helped them tremendously. But we won't have that same option, and that's where it gets sticky, like you said, and it could lead to larger issues. What does war look like, and how hard do times get, and what ends up being different 10 years from now because of what happened in the 2020s. It's impossible to say. You can take a look back at history and try to piece things together, but that's where the global macro puzzle piece, I like putting that puzzle together because I think it's interesting, and you're going to see a shift in a certain direction. And that's why I'm so excited about Bitcoin, at least in this example, because it's such a interesting piece of the macro.
Yeah, no, these charts are all interesting. You can see them on YouTube, but like this world population growth, 1700 to 2100, is incredible because it starts off in 1700, 1600 million people, 1803, 1 billion, 1928, 2 billion, 2.5 billion in 1960, 5 billion by 1987, 7.7 billion where we are at 2019. But it's incredible because the annual growth rate of the population skyrocketed up until 1960, early 60s, and it has been plummeting since. And now we're at 1.08%, and it's predicted by 2100, 0.19%. It makes you wonder if we're heading into that Mad Max world. I don't know. It's just it blows my mind away. We have all as that Real Vision little, I guess, YouTube clip podcast, whatever you want to call it. It's not a little clip. It's a 42-minute long thing where Raoul Pal touches on the shifting demographics and the pension system. The pension system crisis is incredible because you think about whether, especially like federal workers or people in government and teachers, you name it, police officers, firefighters, they're all screwed. Like, all these pensions are underfunded and they're completely relying on the stock market. And that is why, that's why the Fed's only mandate right now is to keep stock prices at all-time high. It is literally their only mandate, because if they don't, the pension system is done for, because they're forced to chase yield because bonds don't have any yield anymore. And it's going to be pretty bad. And again, I've mentioned this before in previous podcasts, Medicare and Medicaid, they run out of funding in 2026, and it doesn't, fine, maybe the Fed will print money to cover it, but that just means it's going to debase our currency further. And then Social Security runs out in 2034. It's a giant Ponzi scheme is what it is. And it's, these things weren't meant to last. And that's the unfortunate reality. And whereas they said, those tailwinds, we're coming into a headwind, and it's going to be painful. Long story short, depopulation is our biggest issue. And that's the deflation. There's not going to be enough people to buy these assets. And whether it's real estate, whether it's stocks, whether it's bonds, it's screwed. And it makes you wonder, Bitcoin, gold, and silver, do they appreciate, against this and, fight the grain, or is just everything, what worries me is just everything deflate.
Right.
Which has been on my mind, because I've seen some people talk about that. Like, you have all these people, these gold bugs who are crazy hell-bent that gold's going to go to this ridiculous high, and what if it doesn't? What if everything deflates together?
Yeah, I've heard some interesting gold calls that are definitely pretty high, but not you wonder how to price anything, because I think I sent you that one interview with Trace Mayer talking about the gold price suppression scheme. I think you've even talked about it. I mean, what's the real price of gold? Well, who the hell knows, because interest rates have been manipulated. So it wouldn't surprise me to see certain things take off, and I think that's what Brendan was kind of talking about here as he gets towards the end was, I like scarce assets because you have something that's fundamentally not scarce, fiat money, that can just be printed into oblivion and used to pump up different asset classes that fit the needs of certain demographics. And it fucking sucks, to be quite honest with you, because it makes it difficult as someone who's paying attention, or at least trying to pay attention. I'm trying to figure out, what do I do, right? How do I both protect myself from it, but then also how do I benefit from it as much as humanly possible? Because I don't want to get fucked and have like a 50% tax rate as I'm going into, the highest earning years of my life. And, all of a sudden the tax rate changes to pay for all this shit because they fucked with the money so much. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I was going to say, speaking of scarce assets, when Hugh Hefner died, my roommate in college and I totally bought up all these Playboy magazines that were in good shape from the 70s and 80s and 90s.
That's too
I don't know
funny.
if they're worth anything, but I still have them. So they're still stored somewhere.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. When we saw the news pop up, I know it's a little off topic, but scarce assets and fiat money, we threw our fiat at it. We were going crazy on eBay.
That's too funny. See what I mean? But there's a reason why you did that. You know what I mean?
We're like maybe it'll be appreciate in a few months or weeks or years. So we just bought them, all the good condition ones.
Yeah. No, that's pretty funny. I think I was trying to see if there was anything else I wanted to touch on in this tweet. So I think the RMD law, we did touch on that, but I wanted to mention that it looks like there could be $10 trillion worth of assets that will be sold on a mandatory basis over the next 2 decades. So that's $5 trillion per decade over the next 2 decades that will come out of the market, and I'd say the majority of that's going to be stocks. So at least to the best of my knowledge, I'm thinking a large portion of that would be stock selling. But that's a lot. I mean, you've had purchasing going on for the last 2 decades with I don't know. It makes things very interesting because it's all happening at the same time. So what do you do in that case? How do you keep pumping stonks because they can't drive the price down to nothing, because when they go to sell, they'll have nothing to retire on. It's a really tricky situation.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. This U.S. 10-year bond yield pretty much tracks the birth as a percentage of total population. And I don't know if that's total population of U.S. or globe. I'm pretty sure it's globe, but either way, that's very interesting. And I've never, I guess up until today, really touched or thought about it in the sense that obviously the Federal Reserve has definitely contributed to inflation along with other central banks over the past 40, 50 years, since dealing from 50 years almost now since we dingled in gold. But I never thought about the demographic aspect of this huge population, and as Raoul mentioned, when the baby boomers are coming of age in the late 70s, early 80s, buying the first house, buying the first car, buying the furniture, buying this, that, buying stocks, and that's a wave of people. And then you think about the pension system buying stocks, their 401ks, their Roths, and that inflates the market because there's more people coming in, and there's a lot more buyers and sellers at that point.
Yeah, it just it can make for some very interesting times. That is for sure.
And Raoul mentioned also another interesting point is like the 2 generations prior, at least the men for the most part, some women too, but really men were wiped out. You think about World War One, roughly 16 million dead, and then people forget you have World War One, 16 million dead. You have the Spanish influenza that wiped out a large chunk of the population, 50 million or something like that. You have the Russian Civil War, which in 1919 wiped off 12 million people. In the 1930s, you had Holodomor, where it's estimated roughly, I'm just going to pick the middle number because it's between 3.5 and 12 million people were starved to death by Stalin. Then you obviously had World War II, and you think about all the genocides surrounding that, along with World War One, the Armenian genocide. World War II was 64 million people wiped off the face of the earth. So it's like, then you had this huge boomer generation come in and start buying up everything, bidding up prices, basically. And we don't have that now. Birth rates are low. People aren't having kids.
Yeah, the low birth rate is definitely, it can contribute to a large issue depending upon where you are. Maybe that doesn't matter in other economies where birth rates are still going up and people are having a lot of kids, but that's not the case in a lot of the Western democratic type of countries. It's just not really there. So it'll be interesting to see what needs to, maybe from like a technological standpoint, like how do you still get certain tasks done or automate certain tasks where there just won't be someone to perform a particular job, whether it's because they don't exist, the person doesn't exist, or because there's just those people aren't in the labor force anymore. It's pretty interesting. It's a fascinating problem to think about. And you touched on the pension issue and just that whole unfunded liability mess and the trillions of dollars that are someone else's liability, that someone else is expecting to get that money. And it's starting to look like they're not going to get it, but I don't think they realize that yet, which is a little unfortunate.
You want to talk about social unrest, people not getting their pensions?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, a lot of the boomers that I work with have multiple pensions from different places, and some might only be giving them $100 a month or something like that because they only worked there for a couple of years, this and that. But when I step back and think, and you can tell me where I'm not seeing this correctly, if you were a boomer and you're in your mid 20s, early 30s, going to hire into a job, and they're going to say, don't worry, if you work for us for 30 years, in 30 more years, you can retire. And you know what? We're going to pay you the same amount of money, even if you're not working. And you didn't think that was a scam, because that's called a Ponzi scheme today, where it's like, oh, don't worry, other people are going to pay in, and we're going to keep making all this money into perpetuity, and we're going to be able to make sure we can keep paying you even when you're not working. Yeah. It sounds insane when you're a little bit more harsh about it. Like, you really fucking thought you were going to get paid to do nothing until you die.
Yeah. And then you think about life expectancies increasing. So
you know what I mean? It's like,
no, like the people who retire at 55, and then the company, like, I know GE's whole pension system is messed up and it's whack. And it's like, okay, so someone retires at 55 and they live till 90. That's 35 years of, let's even say it's $10,000 a year. That's what, is that $350K? It's not terrible, but then you multiply that by a lot, if you multiply that, and then 10,000 was on the lower side, if you could push that number up, you're looking at $1 million per retiree. If you're looking at $1 million per retiree, and you had 100,000 retirees, that's a big freaking issue.
Yeah. The problem is it's a lot more than $1 million per retiree, because some of these people they're retiring with 6-figure pensions.
Yeah.
So do that for 30 years, and you're talking a couple $1 million, and then, give or take, depending upon, the person and how much they were making in their last couple of years before they retired. But, they also had to freeze a lot of those pensions, because eventually someone's like, are you guys fucking dumb? Like, who let you do this? I can't believe you sold this and people bought it. And I can't believe at the same time you guys said, well, don't worry about it. We're just going to have these kids, and they're going to end up paying for it anyway. It's just really, really sketchy when you step back and think about, like, I can't believe all of you collectively did not consider that this wouldn't work in the long run. It is a little mind-blowing. But then again, there's also people who bought people also bought BitConnect, which is like an obvious scam, or Hex scam. Like, people did that kind of stuff. But this is like every boomer didn't. You can ask any of them, they are convinced that Social Security check will show up every month without stop until the day they die. It hasn't even crossed their mind that they wouldn't get that money, that, like, it's a guarantee. There's no way it wouldn't happen. It is unbelievable. I'm just shocked that it could be that obvious to me, but maybe it's only obvious to me because I have hindsight to look at, where I'm like, yeah, this is never going to fucking work, and I have to work for as long as humanly possible to pay for you to not work. It's just like, yeah. And that's where you got to be careful. It's a good thing that boomers and millennials get along, but they really shouldn't have fucking done that. And I hope that millennials and Gen Z figure that out, and then they can try to put a stop to that nonsense and not do that to the next generations below us, because that's fucked up.
Oh no,
just work and save your money. Fuck, it's not complicated. A little responsibility is not difficult. That's why we stack sats, right? That's why people buy things like gold. That's why people learn a skill to make money. You're just trying to stack and protect yourself. Like, you don't need anybody else to take care of you, and certainly not the state, right?
I was gonna say that's fiat currency really fucks things up.
The money fucks it up, dude.
The money fucks it up. It discourages savings, and the big issue is there's a lot of baby boomers who aren't ready for retirement. They don't even have $10,000 in savings account. $10,000, which really isn't that much. But considering how we're encouraged to spend nowadays and work, and so much of America, way up into the middle class, even the upper middle class, live paycheck to paycheck. There's a lot of people in the upper middle class, if they weren't receiving a paycheck for a month, just because of how high their expenses are, trying to live, whether they have a membership at a country club, a fitness club, all these other things for their kids, you name it, paying 2 car payments, mortgage. If they aren't working for a month, they're screwed, and that's the issue with a lot of America right now.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. A lot of people are not prepared, not saved up, and would definitely be in a serious predicament if they lost their job for any extended period of time. It would not be fun. It would really put a stress on the economy. What do you think? Do you think that's a good way to wrap this one up?
Yeah. R.I.P. Ford. That's all I have to say. Even Tesla. God. We're gonna outlast Tesla. That's all that matters at this point. I know I keep saying it.
That's what we got to do, man. We're just gonna keep recording.
Keep recording. We can wrap it up when Tesla's done.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up when Tesla's done. Yeah, but this was episode 71 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast. Please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a comment. We'd love to engage with you guys. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if you have a chance. Those reviews do help. 5 stars would be great, but do what you can. Appreciate that. And follow us on Spotify. Looks like the Spotify listeners has been growing, so that's awesome to hear. So yeah, just stay safe out there. Peace.
Peace.